I will speak about the ego splitting in a very concrete case, and it's about the experience of déjà-vu. Consciousness has the extraordinary capability of leaving absent words, of being also elsewhere. In the act of remembering, in the act of fantasizing, we can inhabit past scenes or possible situations. Let us take an example particularly appropriate on this occasion. I remember when I met Thomas the first time at his office in Heidelberg. On that occasion, we had a long discussion on the subject that yesterday Sean Gallagher addressed, the alteration of time consciousness in depression. We had a different opinion. We criticized Minkowski and Binswanger, but that's not important now. But in any case, I remember that I was impressed by his capability of treating the subject depression from different perspectives. Thomas combined different methods from philosophical anthropology to development psychology, from cognitive sciences to psychoanalysis very naturally. In other words, I already could sense his restless scientific curiosity, and the adjective restless should clearly be stressed. With this paper, I would continue my dialogue with him, initiated 10 years ago, focusing on different forms of temporalization. I will address a subject we have never discussed together, the phenomenology of déjà-vu. I will start my research on déjà-vu with one warning, a sentence written by Blumenberg, which serves as a reference point. In German, wer den Positivismus bevorzugt, lebt ärmlich, wer sich von ihm entfernt, lebt gefährlich. Those who prefer positivism live poorly. Those who move away from it live dangerously. I think that's a very important thread for the dialogue between cognitive science and philosophy. Hans Blumenberg's sentence brilliantly sheds light on an important aspect of the complex relation between a positivist attitude influenced by empirical sciences and a philosophical approach, especially if it's declined in phenomenological terms. But both attitudes entail risks. In order to faithfully describe the lived sense of experience, the phenomenological attitude is inclined to make explicit those aspects of phenomena that usually remain hidden. Accordingly, it can provoke great perplexity. A positivist attitude implies a different kind of danger. In this attitude, one is even more strongly anchored to common sense. Our position in the cosmos becomes more stable and secure, and this attitude entails the risk of not doing justice to the depth of our experience in its fullness. Those anomalies which do not fit with the forestablished paradigm of rationality dominating our technological life world are neglected and overlooked, even if they concern us in a profound way. It is appropriate to add a consideration to Blumenberg's opening sentence. This sentence presupposes a precise assumption regarding the relationship between science and philosophy. Philosophy has traditionally nurtured the ambition of being the sovereign judge of the sciences, or at least of acting as an impartial and panoptic observer superior to the single disciplines. These ambitions have over time miserably failed. The failure has become so evident that sarcastic category has been elaborated, such as Otto Marquardt's notion of competence in compensating for incompetence. Incompetence, Kompensationskompetenz. Philosophy does not have any specific field of research today. It does not have any area exclusively attributed to its competence. So the only jurisdiction remaining within philosophy is to cover up its own incompetence. However, there is still, according to Blumenberg, a limited space for philosophy. Philosophy has the task of clarifying the wide spaces within the different sciences. Philosophy should study what is left out for methodological reason by the single disciplines. Blumenberg's quote, "Philosophy does not have its function before sciences or within sciences or above sciences. I would find it more acceptable to locate philosophy after sciences. Philosophy must begin with a precise knowledge of what the scientific paradigm is incapable of accounting for, according to its own presupposition." Although seductive, such a conception of philosophy cannot, in my view, be considered exhaustive. It does not do justice to the creative and many ways autarkic character of philosophy, as shown, among others, by Deleuze and Guattari in What is Philosophy? Philosophy is primarily a creation of concepts. It's not my intention to discuss in detail here this alternative between the different possibilities of doing philosophy today. I limit myself to the following remark. Although I find the notion of philosophy developed in What is Philosophy by Deleuze and Guattari more convincing from a systematic point of view, it seems to me to be fruitful to follow Blumenberg's approach in this present investigation déjà-vu in order to show how phenomenological inquiry can offer a contribution to the understanding of a phenomenon that escapes the internal logic of the discipline. Then I will start with the second part, the phenomenon of déjà vu in cognitive science. Empirical studies suggest that 67% of the population has experienced the phenomenon of déjà vu at least once. According to the statistics, it's a common experience, but does not happen frequently. It occurs most one or twice per year. It tends to be particularly frequent in youth, and then its frequency gradually decreases with advancing age. The dominant trend in contemporary research tends to treat déjà vu as an abnormal experience without considering it as pathological one. This is not an obvious fact. Especially at the end of the 19th century, the major stream within psychiatric field had conceived déjà vu as a symptom of psychopathological disturbance. In particular, it has been treated as an indication of epilepsy. There is almost non-investigation of déjà vu which does not mention the description of this phenomenon made by Charles Dickens in David Copperfield. I continue this venerable tradition. We have all some experience of a feeling that comes over us occasionally of what we are saying and doing, having been saying and done before, in a remote time, of our having been surrounded them ages ago by the same phases, objects, and circumstances, of our knowing perfectly what will be said next, as if we suddenly remembered it. Vernon Neppes defined déjà vu as any subjectively inappropriate impression of familiarity of a present experience with an indefinite past. There are different explanations of déjà vu within the cognitive sciences. Brown and Marsh show in their informative study that there are three main approaches to understanding the mechanisms behind the déjà vu experience. An explanation through double perception, a neurological explanation, and explanation through implicit memory. In the following, I will make a very quick sketch of these three different approaches to déjà vu. Double perception. According to the first explanatory paradigm, it's possible to understand déjà vu only under the condition that we detect the hidden relation between two intentional acts. The first act happens in such fleeting way that it's not noticed. The double perception explanation considers déjà vu as a result of a rapid succession of two acts. That's a very famous quote in this context. You are about to cross a crowded street and you take a hasty glance in both directions to make sure of a safe passage. Now your eye is caught for a moment by the contents of a shop window and you pause, though only for a moment, to survey the window before you actually cross the street. The preliminary glance up and down that ordinarily connects with the crossing in a single attentive experience is disjointed from the crossing. The look at the window, casual as it was, has been able to disrupt the associative tendencies. As you cross, then you think, why? I crossed the street just now. Your nervous system has severed two phases of a single experience, both of which are familiar, and the latter of which appears accordingly as a repetition of the earlier. I think that's a quite clear explanation. There is a kind of succession of two acts, and one of them happens unnoticed. The second one is the second class of explanation is of neurological nature. Not surprisingly, this is the dominant approach of today for understanding this phenomenon. I do not intend to investigate this approach in depth, since such an attempt would request an essay on a paper on its own. I limit myself to indicate its basis setting by highlighting two different lines of research in this regard. On the one hand, déjà vu is interpreted as a result of a strong electrical stimulation of the temporal lobe that occurs spontaneously without any relation to the perception. This kind of stimulation is of endogenous nature, and the overstimulation of certain brain areas, primarily the hippocampus, modifies the neuronal transmission responsible for cognitive process linked to the memory. On the other hand, there is another line of research locates the origin of déjà vu in an alteration of neuronal transmission speed. This thesis has been particularly successful in the model of the two neural pathways, according to which the information reaches one hemisphere before the other. Okay, then I will consider the third explanation theory. The third class of explanations understand the phenomenon of déjà vu as a result of a deficiency in implicit memory. Déjà vu always implies a reference to a past experience having profound analogy with the present situation. Yet this past experience is not remembered as such. Accordingly, the feeling of familiarity is due to a lapse of memory. It's possible that I've already seen a specific place, but I have forgotten having been there. For example, I'm surprised by the feeling of familiarity connected to Versailles. This feeling is a disturbing one, almost mysterious. Suddenly, an image, like a flash, emerges. I can remember having been there as a child with my parents. The overlap between the past forgotten experience and the present one might relate to the overall situation, like a train station, or to a specific part of the surroundings. Or it can also refer to the common gestalt of the two places. Perhaps this last possibility, the reference to a common gestalt, deserves closer consideration. Let us take an example. I've never been at the airport of Turin. Suddenly, when I'm there, I'm struck by the sensation of having already seen this airport. According to this explanatory paradigm of implicit memory, the feeling of familiarity depends on the similarity between the present circumstances and my past experience, where the same setting, the same distribution, articulation of space, similar neon lights were present. The impression is based on the fact that I have been many times in similar places. Allow me a short remark about this aspect. If we consider this interpretation as valid, we should have a clear proliferation of déjà vu in our contemporary world. Our globalized society is certainly characterized by the reduplication of the same anonymous structures and matrices in different contexts. Marc Auger introduced the notion of no place, no lieu, into the terminology of anthropological studies for referring to an homogeneous forms of space. No places have a very similar structure, the same color, same material, and so on, by fulfilling the same function. The proliferation of this no place should have a consequence, the increase of the sense of déjà vu, if this explanatory paradigm is right. In light of this interpretation, a familiarity with virtual reality could also contribute to the dissemination of déjà vu as well. In this regard, it's interesting to consider the following case reported by Brown. It doesn't work. Okay, Brown is over. I can quote, a couple enters a hotel room. I think it doesn't work also with this system, because I have a key, and that's, I think it's the other PowerPoint, it doesn't work, sorry. A couple enters an hotel room, and against a background of spooky music, the moderately distressed man says, "Have been in this room before." His nonchalant woman partner replies, "What?" To which he repeats, "Have been here before." The woman quickly solves his problem by reminding him that you took the virtual tour on hotels.com. While this serves as a great relief to the man, it illustrates how readily such information might become planted in our experiential memory at a shallow level and connected with the real situation that is playing out in front of us, causing momentary memorial distress. Brown's end of quotes. As a my research, the third part, my research does not aim at explaining the déjà vu experience, but I try to describe it faithfully. Initially, I intend to emphasize the specific character of déjà vu that is very different from a memory error. The explanation of implicit memory makes a categorical mistake. We are not dealing with a generic resemblance between two moments in déjà vu. Rather, we experience a numerical identity. Let us consider Bergson's example of attending a play to observe the difference between a memory error and déjà vu. Bergson quotes, if I am at a play which I have seen before, I recognize one by one each of the words and each of the scenes. At least I recognize the whole piece and recall having seen it before. But I had then a different set and other neighbors and was taken up with other preoccupations. In any case, I could not have been then what I am today, since I have lived in the meanwhile. If then the two images are the same, they are not presented in the same frame, and the vague feeling of the difference of the frames surrounds. The consciousness I have of the identity of the image and allows me at every moment to distinguish them. In déjà vu, on the contrary, the frames are just as identical as the images themselves. I am present at the same play with the same sensations, the same preoccupations. I am at this very moment in the very same position, at the same date, at the same instant of my history, where and when I then was. End of quote. A phenomenological investigation of déjà vu as a philosophical relevance, especially with regard to the time, to the notion of time consciousness. I would like, first of all, to introduce a distinction between two different types of déjà vu. This distinction is ideal typical. In many cases, it's not easy to distinguish between these two forms. The first case of déjà vu is the most common one. A given environment, a word or a smell that awakes in us the feeling of having lived that scene. We have already experienced that moment. Déjà vu is here seen as a phenomenon of a repetition of a single unique lived experience. This repetition depends neither on the memory nor on the imagination. Husserl has shown that imagination as presentification is characterized by the doxic modality in terms of as if. When we imagine, we are detached from the temporal axis of the present, past, and future. We are oriented to the pure possibility, whereas in memory, we are aware of an event that occurred within the history of our individual and collective past. The phenomenon of déjà vu is disturbing since we are living now what is experienced as already know in exactly the same way. We cannot make sense of this repetition since we are not able to identify and locate the original scene in the past horizon. The present scene is felt as the repetition of a primary scene, but the latter remains ungraspable, since it's identical with the present, one down to the smallest details. The ungraspable primary scene can be found neither in the horizon of the past experience nor in the context of the imagination. The first form of déjà vu has a specific way of appearing that cannot be understood in light of the fundamental difference made by Husserl between presentation and presentification, Gegenwärtigung and Vergegenwärtigung. Can déjà vu be conceived as Vergegenwärtigung? This possibility is very problematic, since Vergegenwärtigung, as a presentification, always presupposes a split, a gap between the scene lived by the presentifying ego and the scene experienced by the presentified ego. In all different cases of presentification, recollection, imagination, there is a radical detachment from our actual perceptual horizon. We project ourselves into another experiential situation that is radically different from our given perceptual surroundings. On the other hand, if we consider the Gegenwärtigung, that's also not possible. It's also not possible. I hope that I hope it works. It doesn't work. I don't know. Is then a déjà vu a Gegenwärtigung? This must also be excluded since no ego split takes place in Gegenwärtigung. In Gegenwärtigung, the intentional life of the ego is immersed in the present situation without double consciousness. Déjà vu is an ambiguous phenomenon of repetition occurring within the present horizon. Although there is a kind of repetition and an ego split within the present horizon. Accordingly, it's not appropriate to identify this phenomenon as Vergegenwärtigung. Rather, we deal here with a paradoxical Wiedergegenwärtigung, a presentation anew. I find it interesting to address this phenomenon because it escapes this differentiation between presentification and presentation. On one hand, there is an ego split, and on the other hand, it's an ego split within the same present horizon. And that's something that in normal, it escapes this kind of basic differentiation within phenomenology. That's the first part about the first form of déjà vu. The second form of déjà vu is the most baffling. According to Geiners, 38 of déjà vu experience entail some moment of precognition. In many cases of déjà vu, the dimension of the future is the most significant one. The great psychiatrist Emil Kraepelin reports one of the most striking experiences related to this second form of déjà vu. This experience has been also quoted and described in particular significant way by Ernst Bloch. Let's say if it works. It works. Emil Kraepelin, in his reliable, solid textbook of psychiatry, reports the fantastic experience he himself underwent. While on expedition through an unexplored region of Peru, he felt not only that he had witnessed the entire scene before, but knew in the same moment that a bridge was about to come into view around the bend in the road. This foreknowledge seem to have been included in the moment of déjà vu. And indeed, after passing the bend of the road, the bridge stood before him just with all details that he had anticipated. Such prophetic moments also occur in less exotic cases of déjà vu, albeit in less clearly developed form. Bloch. Why is this experience so puzzling? Kraepelin did not have a vague premonition of the presence of a bridge around the bend of the road, but he saw in advance from a specific perspective the unique scene that would appear immediately. That bridge in that particular light, in that specific context. Kraepelin witnessed an impossible repetition of what is contingent. Okay. Another interesting case is reported by Freud. It's a lady who is now 37, claimed to have a most distinct memory of having, at the age of 12 and half, paid her first visit to some school friends in the country. When she entered the garden, she had an immediate feeling of having been there before. This feeling was repeated when she went into the reception rooms, so that she felt she knew in advance what room would be the next one, what view there would be from it, and so on. But the possibility that this feeling of familiarity could have owed its origin to an earlier visit to the house and garden, perhaps one in her earliest childhood, was absolutely ruled out and was disproved as a result of her questioning her parents. That's, as it's clear that Freud is not interested to the form, to the way of appearance. It's immediately focusing on the libidinal mechanisms. That's it's not very strange. I don't have a lot of time. Sonia made this clear to me. That's why I wanted to go to the basic point. I think Bergson gave the most interesting account of déjà vu. Although it's also quite paradoxical that at the end of his article he said that he never experienced the déjà vu personally. But he tries to understand the déjà vu in the light of the split between the actual perception, which is open to what is next, and the memory of the immediate past. I think that déjà vu as a more complicated structure, and the most important aspect is the relation to the future. As in my view, déjà vu as a disturbance does not concern primarily the relation between memory and present. It regards rather the relationship between expectation and the present. The déjà vu experience is uncanny, since what is new is experienced in an impossible manner as being already known. It is possible to define what is new as the differential and unpredictable limit between the present and the future. Husserl regards this mobile limit, termed primary impression, as an originary creation. In déjà vu, the eruption of the primary impression is felt as already experienced, as if one would already know which direction things will take. The primary impression appears to be already old here. The key feature of the déjà vu is not the familiarity of the present with the past, but rather with the imminent future, with what comes next and should surprise us. The primary impression is lived as a repetition of what cannot be located in past time, but can be anticipated. This pretension to not anticipate the general style of the apparitions, but they refer to the unique, concrete situation. We do not have a consciousness of something past with the present content, as Bergson assumes. We live in the anticipation of the imminent future that partially overlaps with the perception of the present content. In Husserl's terminology, in specific forms of déjà vu, we experience the paradoxical situation of having partially intuitively fulfilled pretensions without any reference to past retentions. So we have the capability of having partially intuitively fulfilled pretensions without any reference to past retentions. I will finish with this quote of Walter Benjamin. But Walter Benjamin is one of the few authors who emphasize the missing link to the future. Indeed, he brilliantly describes how déjà vu entails a reference to the future. The déjà vu effect has often been described, but I wonder whether the term is actually well chosen, and whether the metaphor appropriate to the process would not be far better taken from the realm of acoustics. One ought to speak of events that reach us like an echo awakened by a call, a sound that seems to have been heard somewhere in the darkness of past life. Accordingly, if we are not mistaken, the shock with which moments enter in consciousness as if already lived, usually strikes us in the form of a sound. Here doesn't work. But has the counterpart of this removal ever been investigated? The shock with which we come across a gesture or a word, the way we suddenly find in our house a forgotten glove, and just as they cause us to surmise that a stranger has been there, there are words or gestures from which we infer this invisible stranger, the future, who left them in our keeping. Benjamin takes as something graceful and inspired, and at the same time it's constructed in the same way as a detective novel. The presence of a glove suggests that someone has entered the house. Who was the stranger? The answer is as bizarre as it's phenomenological correct: the future. Déjà vu is treated as an eruption of the future into the present. This eruption has a quite unintentional character, as if the future had accidentally stumbled into the present scene. It is in the wrong place, like a forgotten glove. Thank you very much for your attention.